Blue lights hit your rearview mirror out of nowhere. Your hands tighten on the steering wheel before your brain even catches up. You weren't speeding, you weren't swerving. In fact, you were doing something completely ordinary, maintaining your own front yard. And somehow that turned into flashing lights, a badge at your window, and the words nobody expects to hear in their own driveway. Step out of the vehicle. Have you ever been questioned, detained, or even threatened by police when you felt like you did absolutely nothing wrong? If you have, I want you to share that experience in the comments, because what you think is nothing can look very different from the officer's point of view. And later on, I'm going to break down exactly why situations like this spiral so fast, even when you believe you're 100% in the right. Now here's where things start to get uncomfortable. Most people assume police encounters only happen on highways, at checkpoints, or after obvious violations. But some of the most confusing, frustrating, and legally messy situations happen right in residential areas, right in front of your own home, where your expectations are completely different. You're relaxed, you're in your territory, you're not mentally prepared for a confrontation, and that's exactly why these encounters can go sideways so quickly. Picture this. You're parked partially on the curb, maybe with your hazard lights on. You've got tools out. Maybe you're trimming hedges, fixing a sprinkler line, or clearing debris. You step in and out of your vehicle, moving things around. It looks harmless to you because it is harmless. But from a distance, especially to an officer scanning for suspicious behavior, it might not look so simple. An officer drives by once, slows down, drives by again. Now they stop. This is the moment most people underestimate, that first visual assessment. Officers are trained to observe patterns, not just action. They're asking themselves questions before they ever speak to you. Why is this person repeatedly going in and out of a vehicle? Why is the car partially obstructing a public path? Is this person dumping something? Moving items that don't belong to them? Acting nervously? And here's the part nobody tells you. Context matters less than behavior. You know you're maintaining your yard, the officer doesn't. And until they're convinced, you're just another unknown variable. So they approach. Hey, what's going on here? Simple question, right? Harmless even. But this is where people make their first mistake. They answer too casually. Or worse, too defensively. I live here, I'm just working on my yard, what does it look like? Now pause for a second. That tone, whether you realize it or not, can instantly change the direction of the interaction. Officers aren't just listening to your words, they're analyzing your tone, your pace, your eye contact, your hands, even how quickly you respond. If your response feels dismissive or irritated, it raises their guard. Now instead of a quick clarification, you've triggered suspicion. Do you have ID on you? This is where things start getting legally complicated, because now we're entering that gray zone that most drivers don't fully understand. Consensual encounter versus detention. At this stage, the officer may not have reasonable suspicion of a crime. They're still gathering information, but your behavior during these few seconds can push things in one direction or the other. If you immediately comply, hand over ID, and keep things calm, the situation might de-escalate quickly. But if you hesitate or assert your rights without understanding how to do it properly, you can unintentionally escalate things. I don't need to show you ID. I'm on my own property. Now here's the uncomfortable truth. You might be legally correct in certain situations, but being correct doesn't prevent escalation. It often accelerates it. The officer now has to decide, are you refusing lawful orders or simply asserting your rights? And that decision happens fast, sometimes too fast. All right, step over here for me. That's a shift. You've just moved from a casual interaction into something more controlled. Your freedom of movement is now being directed. And even if you haven't been told you're detained, you're starting to feel it. This is where many people panic internally, but try to stay calm externally. And that internal tension leaks out in ways you don't notice. Short answers, shaky hands, avoiding eye contact. Officers notice all of it. Now let's add another layer. Imagine a neighbor called this in. Suspicious person moving things in a yard. Now the officer isn't just acting on observation, they're responding to a report. That changes the dynamic entirely. It gives them a stronger basis to investigate, even if the report turns out to be inaccurate. So now they might ask more pointed questions. Whose property is this? How long have you lived here? Why were you going in and out of the vehicle? Each question is building a narrative, They're trying to either confirm or eliminate suspicion. And here's another mistake people make. They over-explain. They start talking too much, adding unnecessary details, trying to sound convincing. But the more you talk, the more opportunities there are for inconsistencies, misunderstandings, or misinterpretations. A pause, a slight change in wording, even something as simple as correcting yourself mid-sentence can raise doubt. Now the officer's tone changes. Not aggressive, just firmer. Do you mind if I take a look inside your vehicle? This is a critical moment, because this is no longer just about your yard. Now your vehicle is part of the interaction, and consent becomes everything. If you say yes, you've just opened the door, literally and legally, for a search that might extend far beyond what you expected. If you say no, you need to do it calmly and clearly. I don't consent to any searches. No attitude, no explanation, just clarity. But here's the part that makes people uncomfortable. Even if you refuse, the officer might continue asking. They might rephrase. They might apply subtle pressure. Why not? If you've got nothing to hide, it shouldn't be a problem. That line has led countless people into giving consent they didn't intend to give. And once consent is given, it's very hard to take back. Now imagine something small is found. Not illegal, but questionable. Tools, containers, items that could be interpreted differently. Now the officer's suspicion is reinforced. And suddenly, maintaining your own front yard doesn't feel so simple anymore. Now let's shift to something even more serious. The moment an officer tells you to step out of the vehicle. This is where many people resist instinctively. Why do I need to step out? I didn't do anything. But under US law, officers generally have the authority to order drivers, and even passengers, out of a vehicle during a lawful stop. Refusing this order can escalate things quickly. And here's where tone becomes everything. If you step out slowly, visibly, without sudden movements, you maintain a level of control over the situation. If you argue while stepping out or hesitate too long, the officer may interpret that as resistance or potential threat. Now imagine you're standing outside your own vehicle, in front of your own house, with neighbors watching. That psychological pressure is real. People start thinking about how they look, what others are assuming, whether they're being judged. And that distraction can cause mistakes. You might speak out of frustration. You might interrupt the officer. You might forget to stay consistent. And consistency is something officers pay close attention to. Now let's talk about something subtle but powerful, the waiting game. Officers sometimes hold on to your ID longer than expected. They return to their vehicle, they run checks, they sit there. Minutes pass, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, maybe longer. That silence is intentional. It creates pressure. People start questioning themselves. Did I say something wrong? Are they finding something? That internal dialogue can lead to impulsive decisions when the officer returns. Now you're more likely to agree to something you would have refused earlier, just to end the situation. And that's exactly what you need to be aware of. Because the longer a stop feels, the more psychological weight it carries. Now let's bring this back to the original situation, being arrested for maintaining your own front yard. It sounds absurd, and in many cases it is. But arrests don't always happen because of one clear violation. They often happen because of a chain of small events that build up. A tone that felt disrespectful, a refusal that was interpreted as obstruction, a misunderstanding that wasn't clarified properly, a neighbor's call that added suspicion, an officer's judgment that leaned toward caution. Put all of that together and suddenly you're in handcuffs trying to explain something that started out completely normal. And here's the part that really matters. What you do in those first few minutes often determines everything that follows. Not just legally, but practically. You can be right and still end up arrested. You can be innocent and still face charges. Because roadside interactions are not courtrooms. They're fast-moving, high-pressure situations where decisions are made in real time with limited information. And once things escalate, it's very difficult to reverse them on the spot. That's why understanding how officers think is just as important as knowing your rights. They're looking for threats. They're assessing control. They're evaluating compliance. They're reading behavior more than listening to explanations. So if your behavior sends mixed signals, even unintentionally, it complicates everything. Now here's something that might challenge what you've heard before. A lot of people say, just stay silent. And yes, you have the right to remain silent. But silence without clarity can sometimes create confusion. If you're going to remain silent, you need to communicate that clearly. I'm choosing to remain silent. Then stop talking, not halfway, not selectively, completely. Because partial silence, answering some questions but not others, can look inconsistent. And inconsistency raises suspicion. Now let's talk about passengers for a moment. If someone else is in the vehicle while you're working in your yard, they become part of the interaction. Officers may question them separately. And here's where things get risky. If your passenger says something slightly different, even unintentionally, it creates a discrepancy. Now the officer has conflicting information, and that alone can justify further investigation. So coordination matters, not in a deceptive way, but in a clear, consistent understanding of the situation. Now imagine this scenario escalates to the point where you're being told you're under arrest. The shock alone can cause people to react emotionally. This is ridiculous. I didn't do anything. And while that may be true, this is not the moment to argue. Because anything you say at this point can be used later, and emotional responses rarely help your situation in the moment. What matters now is preserving your position for later, when you're in a setting where facts actually matter more than perception. And here's something many people don't realize. Officers don't need to be right in the moment. They need to be reasonable. That's a lower threshold than most people expect. So even if the situation seems unjustified to you, it might still meet the legal standard for an arrest. And that's why preparation matters. Not paranoia, not fear, just awareness. Because these situations don't announce themselves in advance. They happen in ordinary moments, in your driveway, on your street, in front of your neighbors. And the difference between a quick conversation and a full-blown arrest often comes down to small, easily overlooked details. The way you answer, the way you move, the way you manage pressure. So next time you see those lights, or even just an officer slowing down near you, remember this. You're not just explaining what you're doing, you're showing it through your behavior. And sometimes, that matters more than anything you say.